The Think Good podcast, where therapists talk about TV shows, movies, books, and life.
Hello, welcome back to Think Good podcast. I'm Dr. Tayeba Shaikh, and I am here with my friend and colleague, Ankur Varma, LCPC. And what an episode we have for you today.
Yep, we're going to discuss this new show that is taking really the world by storm, it seems. Social media, people in real life, at work, talking about it. I know I've had a couple mini conversations with clients. So today we're going to dive into the show Heated Rivalry, which is a show on HBO and I think Crave as well, and really dives into this romance love story between two-star athletes.
We are, yes to all those things. And we are just really excited to kind of talk about one, how much this show has impacted like every community. I think that's what you and I, Ankur, have been talking about kind of like on the side, is this idea that this isn't really like specific to one community. We know that this is about two hockey players, professional athletes, they're gay, two men, and there is this love story about the fact that they are enemies on the ice and then become, intertwined in this love story. And I just think there's so many themes here that come up. And one, I just think first and foremost, this idea that we get right into the fact that both of them have not come out as gay, as bisexual, as any sexuality is not talked about, right? They present as straight men. And I think it's a really incredible one, I should say, I think it is incredibly written, these characters, because there is so much depth to who they are and the story that is being told here. And it just kind of supersedes the fact that it's about two gay men who are closeted and then come out. Like, there are just so many layers here. And I thought we could just jump right in and kind of talk about some themes that really kind of resonated with us. What did we see? I'm going to kind of ask you, Encore, especially working with men and mental health. What was your initial thoughts, your take? I know we've talked about this a ton, like in our lives since the show has come up. It's been like everywhere on social media and everywhere in our group chats. But I'd love to kind of hear from you, sort of like tell me what you were thinking.
Well, I think it's maybe helpful to start with kind of the story of how this show came into my life because, we should probably have my wife on here. I think she is the heated rivalry expert of the world by this point because she's been staying up almost every night, reading, watching interviews, diving into message boards and I think the way that I came into this show is probably pretty parallel for I think the dialogue and the expectations I think around media that features gay folks and non cis hetero folks that TV is centered on for all of media time, right? And I think when I remember I walked in, my wife was watching it, and there was a very intimate scene on right then, and it looked like she had just been caught with like her hand in the cookie jar. Like she was just like, "Oh my God!" Like a parent walking in on their kids, right? It was hilarious. I was like, "What are you watching? Like, what could you possibly be watching that you're like so almost embarrassed to be caught with?" And it's a very romantic scene on TV between two men. And so I think there was an assumption too from her that I'm gonna, be, I don't know, something negative towards this show and I will have zero interest in it. And even that I would be turned away from it in some way. And so whether that's annoyed or even disgusted or something. And I think that's what really was interesting for me because I grew up, you know, around athletes and playing sports and culture is very much what we think about when we think about masculine culture. So, there was a real, expectation for you to act that way. And the idea of even questioning your sexuality was not even an option for so many people. And I think that still remains in the sense of like that I wouldn't even be interested in the show. She's like, obviously this is my show as a female, as a woman, that I would be interested in this, but my my straight husband would not. And so I think that's one of the central themes here too that I'd love to explore even more.
Yeah, and I think you kind of raised this huge point that we've been talking about, which is one, like the maybe like conscious or subconscious biases we have, like whether that be it as like straight men, women, gay, all the things. And this is a story that, like I said, has touched so many people from different communities. And I kind of want to get into talking about why, like what was the story, what was it about Shane and Ilya's love story that kind of got the whole internet up in arms. I feel like I'm such a boomer calling it the internet, social media up in arms, but also this idea that it was so, I kind of shared this, like it was so, the character development was so much happened in such a short period of time in every episode. And like
Six
this is over the
episodes total
span.
too.
Yeah, so it's only 6 episodes, and yet it's like years, right? It's like these
Mhm.
seasons and these 2 individuals who can't really be together find themselves lusting for each other, falling in love, spoiler alerts here, and then ultimately caught together at the end of the show by Shane's dad. But all of that to say there's so much life that's lived in between. So I'm wondering if it would be helpful to kind of give a little bit of background on like Shane and Ilya
Yeah, can you
first.
can you talk a little bit? I was thinking about that too in terms of, what you saw in the evolution of this, like you said, 6 episodes, so not a very long show, almost like a mini series, but like a lot of plot development, a lot of character development, a lot of plot development built into it. Talk about what you saw in terms of their evolution here.
Yeah, so I'm gonna just start with Shane. I mean, I think he just gets introduced as this like kind of golden boy, like he's the best. He goes professional, really kind of buttoned up and like beloved, like to the community, to just very representative of what like a hometown hero would be, right? And I think that they show him as this kind of like perfectionist, this little bit of control freak, and his high functioning anxiety, right? That's kind of the first thing that I noticed as a psychologist, of course, is like, okay, like he's very structured, he's very rigid, he
Hmm.
has his routine and he doesn't deviate from it. And it has brought him, it served him well, right? It's like allowed him to be the best hockey player. I think they show us like in the beginning, Leah ends up being drafted as number one, right? And Shane's number two. And so
Hmm.
like these are like the best, I think they show the top three draft picks. But really this idea that he is kind of perfect, like on the outside. And then we kind of come over to Ilya, who has this sort of like charisma and he has this bravado, this arrogance. He comes from Russia and like he's kind of this like ladies man and just really charming. And so immediately you see this like stark contrast where you kind of feel like Shane is taking this like very seriously and Ilya's like he's good, just as good, if not better, in terms of like athleticism, is like a little bit more like laid back and easygoing. And so you see that like kind of contrast right away. These are 2 elite athletes. And they're one thing we can say absolutely they have in common is that their like entire identities are tied into being these hockey players, right? These professional players. And so I think that's how we get into their self-image and what could potentially threaten it, their sexuality, their relationship. So even if we're just talking about them individually as coming out, what's really interesting is that it threatens this idea, if they were to come out together, it threatens this like rivalry that we know gets created in sports, right? Like, it's huge. I mean, it's like you have to think about the fact that you have these 2 rivals that have been going after each other. It's always Shane and Ilya on the ice.
Hmm.
And then imagine they're in this like romantic relationship. Like that would like quote unquote crush the sports industry, right? Like that
Hmm.
we very much build up these rivalries in our heads and they're all over the media. So I think that's kind of a big piece here.
Yeah, and I think there's a very like we're also talking about representation, right? There is a very real life possible story. And at the same time, I think one parallel I think was made probably in some point at when Bullock was like reading deep diving into the background of this, but somebody made a parallel around a real life duo of kind of rivals that came in the league around the same time, which was Sidney Crosby and Alexander Ovechkin. both of whom are like retired or maybe at the very end of their careers. But I remember I being in like high school, college when they first started. Sidney Crosby is not a hometown kid, but he was the young kid coming up, 18 years old, hard worker, great, like face of a franchise immediately. And for a classic franchise in Pittsburgh, and then Alexander Ovechkin, who came from Russia as like this star hockey player from Russia, and they were always hyped up, and they both actually fulfilled the hype, right? They both had long Hall of Fame, greatest of all time kind of careers. And so I thought that was interesting. And it probably is intentional, because how could it not be? Because it really was something. And I'm not a huge hockey fan. You guys can, if you're watching on YouTube, like I'm wearing a football jersey to pretend like I'm wearing a hockey jersey. So, but I remember that was the time hockey in high school and college where I actually paid attention to some hockey. And and those were two guys that I watched a lot, and so it was really interesting to see, because it allows the viewer to really feel like, oh, this could be something real, right? And that's also what I loved about, and I think this is the reframe for us men who are not supposed to watch gay media and Hollywood and all of this stuff, is, you know this is stuff that we can absolutely see happening. It just hasn't happened, which is really an unfortunate, really sad thing, that we still to this day do not have any out star athletes in any sport that I can think of, right? And any athlete that I've seen that has come out is maybe towards the end of their career or after their career, or is not a significant headliner kind of name. And so, we're still waiting for this barrier to be broken. And I know people like to say it's 2023, it's 2024, it's 20, right? We're still not there.
Yeah, and I think like that I think that's what made the story in a lot of ways. It was like this incredible watch, and then it was also, I had shared with you, this like very sad, kind of tragic
Hmm.
heaviness that I felt, which is like, wow, like we are still at the point where like these two people just like love each other, and yet they are feeling like they might sacrifice their entire images, careers, or compromise their endorsements, their fan base, or like all these things that they've worked for simply because of their sexuality or who they choose to be in a relationship with and love. And I think that was really painful, that undertone. We'll kind of get into the characters a little bit more, but there's like a third character, Scott, who is
Mm,
also a professional player, a hockey player, and he ultimately ends up coming out as he like wins the cup and like brings
hmm,
his boyfriend, who throughout their relationship has really had to hide the fact that he is
mm,
just so like in the media and out there. He's a really famous player, and his boyfriend is not. And so they talk about um the sacrifice of them being together. And it's Kip, right? Is it
I
Kip?
believe so. Yeah.
Yeah, and Kip is, he works at the smoothie place, and he has a dad who loves him, and he has an amazing group of friends, and he can't just talk about this like wonderful, beautiful guy that he met and that they're having this relationship, and it's all a secret, and that's just like so devastating. And I think to kind of come back, it really brings me back to Shane and Ilya, and how they cannot be together. And they come from really different backgrounds. I wanted to talk about that a little bit. Shane has these two wonderful parents who are really grounded, really love him. His mom seems like she's kind of maybe like managing him, in charge of his career, super involved, very loving, but also just very much involved, and yet still feels like very healthy, right? Like there's communication,
Mm,
there's lunches, they're talking about like when Rolex comes, these endorsements, and everything feels
hmm.
really collaborative. I mean, there's nothing that really feels too overwhelming in that moment. I think they did a good job of kind of showing her as just very invested and loyal and involved, but not overbearing, because you see
It was
Shane.
like too
Yeah.
healthy. That was the most uncomfortable dynamic for me actually to watch. Like I'm okay
You
with
don't
like
love your
Ilya. Ilya
parents.
on the other hand is like all this unreal pressure from his family, his
Yes.
dad, his brother, his
Yep.
his mom passed away at an early age. and he's got all this pressure to, and, he's like the athlete that has to go send money home for care, and then
Yep.
whatever his brother's blowing money on, and it's just so unhealthy and so much trauma and so much pressure. And then Shane, and that's what I was like, and there were even moments where I'm like, oh, mom is going to be maybe overbearing. I think maybe Japanese or Asian background, and so like you get a little bit of that cultural dynamic too, right? In terms of he's got this additional pressure of being one of the first Asian parents or Asian stars and athletes in the league. And you're like, I was like worried, okay, she's going to be too much in his business. Sometimes parents as agents kind of, that dynamic happens in sports. And no, it's like so balanced and healthy. And then towards the
Yeah.
end, the cottage episode, the way they handle that, I think we'll come back to that. It's just,
Yeah.
that's what made me so uncomfortable. I was
That's
like,
so
wait,
funny.
this is all healthy. What's
That was the
happening here?
fictional part. That was the
Yes,
fictional part of the sto
exactly.
No, but it was so beautifully written, right? And it was like I think I think what was really sort of highlighted was Ilya, like, the dynamic of his family, the pressure, even, like, the toxicity around his brother. Like, he keeps saying, like, "Send me more money. I have a wife, I have a kid," and yet you find out he's blowing the money on drugs and on going out, and then his dad is abusive in those ways. They don't give you like the total exact background. I think we know that his mom got really sick and then ultimately overdosed, and had a suicide, and the trauma that comes, like that softness or
Mhm.
vulnerability that comes from him being able to talk about his mom with Shane at a later point, and knowing that that is something that is kept like so deep inside, right? So they just have these two really different backgrounds. And I think it really shows this like safety that they form with each other, this emotional bond and connection that even if they have these different temperaments, these different personalities, they have grown up in different worlds. When they come together, there's this real like admiration and love and respect that they have for each other. I think first that gets built as athletes. Like you see kind of over the span of years where one wins, the other one does, and like they're both like they have these moments where they're watching the other one on TV, like one got injured or one ends up winning the cup, and there's this like true happiness that they feel, right? Not like this jealousy, not this anger, not this, but like this actual respect and admiration. I thought that that was really unique because that started like from a place of being these elite athletes and being able to appreciate like this very insular world that we talk a lot about where you probably only understand if you're in that world, and then building on that this emotional connectedness. This, we know that the physical chemistry is there. I think that that's how the relationship starts out, right? And we talk a lot about how, well, we have talked a lot about how that is kind of the beginnings of their relationship. It's physical, it's
Mhm.
an intense connection, and that kind of blooms into this sort of like text, like back and forth, and this like banter and this friendship, and then this love. And so I think so much about how, like, what a green flag this relationship was, and what was it about these two that had us like polarized and like enamored? Like that was just like, wow, like is it the
Mhm.
romance? Is it the love? Is it the respect? Is it like how much they adore each other? Because there were just so many moments and you're rooting for them, and there's this like true joy. Like all you want is like for them not just to be together. Cause even there's moments when you're watching The Cottage for me where I'm like, I want them out in a store together, like holding, like I want them to publicly feel safe and loved and be out
Mm.
there. And yet they're hiding, they're having to hide this love story. And I think that was kind of the biggest
Yeah.
tragedy of it all.
Well, look, I think, you're really hitting on something that is, both cultural and psychological in the sense that, they're really showing us how two men should be in relationship with each other. I don't, I think if you remove the intimacy and the physical intimacy and the romance, you maybe just have a healthy relationship between two men. And, I think this is kind of the weight that gay and non-heterosexual identifying folks have been carrying for a long time, right? Is showing what it is like to be in touch with your emotions as a man. And, I do, one thing I said to Pollock and one one thing I've been really reflecting on since watching it is, am I talking about it with the guys in my life, and who am I talking about it with, right? And, you know, I was in a group chat with a few friends, all of whom are straight, and I brought it up. We were talking about some TV, and we were all, and I knew this was like a safer group to bring it in, because I also know that there are other groups that would just off the cuff just deny even wanting to do that, make comments about it. And that's an unfortunate truth, of how things still can be. And so I think it's really, what I loved about it is like, and really why I like that cottage scene, besides that being my dream home, is this being a way for them. Their love story has evolved. It started, like you said, it started physical. It started through this almost act of aggression, right? They were paired as enemies with each other, and whether they actually felt that way and or not, they brought out the best in each other, right? They never like, just because they were in love or building something doesn't mean that hurt their competitiveness. And so they still had that. And so, I think it built out of that into something more deep and real. And at the same time, really what I love that they show, and I love what you said about, man, I wish we could see them out at a restaurant or at the grocery store, and just, what does it look like to communicate, to, be there for the other person, and when you need them, they're there for you, right? Like, I saw a therapist online talking about co-regulation and emotional regulation in a relationship, and how it goes both ways, right? It's not one partner's responsibility to do all the emotional, you know, load carrying. And there are times for each, and each one has their strengths, and those are things that we can apply to male friendships. And that's a lot of what is sometimes missing. We get to the kind of the physical way. We play sports together, or we watch sports together. We do something that's like a little bit more on that like active aggressive side of things. And then we'll talk about dating, we'll talk about women, we'll talk about, all of these manly things. And then we just don't get to the intimate connection part, the emotional connection part. And so that's really what's missing, and really what we're seeing in so many, of this, like when we talk about loneliness epidemic, is this lack of connection between men. And why are men coming to me for therapy? Because I get it, right? Which means that men are really desiring some sort of male to male connection. And that's what I really love the most about this show.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you brought that up because I think that that's kind of what has I think it struck a lot of people around the show and the character development, but really the vulnerability that Shane particularly comes with, right? Like there's this kind of real literalness to him where he is just kind of saying what he feels, and he really calls out Ilya and he's like, "No, we're not going to do that. This isn't what this is. Are we going to talk about what this is? Are we going to?" And it feels so, it feels like intentional, it feels direct, it doesn't feel like too much, yet we are conditioned. I was just talking to Bullock about this, like, as women, like, is that really what you want? You think about putting your heart out there, all your cards on the table, and how women will often say, yes, like, that's what I want. I just want a direct, honest guy who wants to commit and do all the things.
Mm.
And then what happens when a guy is that vulnerable and is that open? It's very scary. We're not really socialized and conditioned to believe that that's safe or that's real. Um, and so I think that that can be so fear-based too of like what's happening here. And so there really needs to be this like we really need to be thinking about this as men, as women, as like just as a whole in all of
Yep.
our relationships. Like what is healthy? And I think that's what I'm struck by the most in the show is when I'm talking about a green flag, when I'm talking about Shane and Ilya, I'm talking about the love and the respect that they have for each other and the way that they show up for each other. What the relationship, how it evolves and how it blossoms into this incredibly vulnerable, deep, unconditional love is something that I think we yearn for. And yet, do we have the capacity to take that in and like know it when we see it or be that?
Yeah, and I think, I think we're just, I guess we're gonna call everybody out here, right? And I think that's what this show does, right? And it does, and it's not calling us out, it's just urging us to be better, right, to each other. And, I think there's, so much rivalry in the world, whether it's Kendrick and Drake or it's sports, LeBron versus Steph. it's always about like who's better, right? Even like, we grew up with LeBron and MJ. Why can't they both be great? And they like MJ, was great and LeBron can be also great or great or whatever. But, I think we're so conditioned to compete, right? And I'm also thinking about like, oh my God, I forgot the other rapper, but like Nicki and Cardi B, right? It's like always a rivalry. Always we got to talk trash, always against each other. And and it's never like, why can't we have Brittany and Taylor? I'm running out of pairs here, but I think
This
that really
boomer over
shows.
here bringing up Britney.
So yeah, I really love
Brittany and
too that
Christina. Let's just
yeah,
age
Brittany and Christina. There
ourselves.
we go. So, Seal Ball and Dolly Parton, but what I love about this is it really shows that you can have something healthy. Ilya really struggles with his family dynamic. He doesn't have support, but he's able to find that, that directness really brings out from Ilya, because Ilya is also like portrayed in that like typical Russian direct, says what he means, doesn't care about anybody else's feelings way. But then Ilya also is like at times like the mushy kind of romantic. There's this beautiful scene where Shane, Ilya's having a really difficult time in Russia, and Ilya's just so frustrated, but he can't communicate because he's not able to communicate to Shane in English what he's really thinking and feeling. And Shane, man, what a great moment from Shane, is like, just say it in Russian. Like, just say it, even if I don't understand it, just get it out. And he says it, and then, I think he ends that by saying, like, I love you in Russian or something, really endearing. And, it's just this really beautiful moment. Again, you remove the romance and you have just, again, a really good model for just two human beings being there in support of each other.
Yeah, and I think like that's what I do think it comes back like, when I'm thinking about this from like these psychology undertones, like Shane's upbringing and the foundation, they show his healthy parents and the fact that he's able to be there. He's not looking for something, he's not feeling insecure because he doesn't understand it. I mean, it's coming from such a secure, intentional place where he's like, "Hey, I'm here. I'm going to show up for you in the best way I know how, because all that matters is that I'm here. So whether you're speaking Russian and I'm speaking English doesn't matter because I'm here." And that is such a healthy dynamic, and like the communication, the permission, the access to be like, "Hey, do it." And the courage it also takes for Ilya to come from the fact that he has not been able to trust these relationships or these bonds or these attachments. And he's unsure of what this is going to look like, yet the safety gets created by Shane and him together, and he is also vulnerable. So I just think so much of this comes from both of them and what they're willing to put into the relationship. And then, I think like when we get to the cottage and we get ultimately to the end of the season, you see how much they've grown like together, like both as
Hmm.
athletes, as individuals, like they've now they're not rookies anymore, right? Like they've really understood their hockey world. At one point, Shane dates like a female actress, and she very graciously and lovingly says, "Hey, like I think you might be gay," like, and there is some like challenges in their sexual relationship and in their intimacy. And so that kind of comes out. They have had other relationships and life moments over the years, and still come back to each other. And so I think you see that development too.
And they're going through, such an important process around, this like dealing with what do gay athletes have to do to survive, right? And, we might think that they're having to play kind of into this like toxic masculinity atmosphere and, show that they have a girlfriend or a wife or something to that effect. But really too, I think, it evolves into, as you start, it's like there's so many other characters involved in the story. And then towards the end, it's just them, right? And I love the symbolism too of that, like recognizing like at the core, what this is about, right? And they're solely, as the episode's going on, shedding these other layers that, they've had to put on to protect themselves throughout, right? Ilya is this ladies man, and so it's like, how could he possibly be bi or gay, right? his lifestyle in no way would allow for that. And for Shane, he leads a private lifestyle, but has this like very public relationship with this, actress. And and then the way that she even like, approaches this conversation is such a great like, model for allyship too, to like soft landing for him, a safe space for him to actually recognize this and release it because he's been holding on to it for so long and with nobody to talk to about it.
Yeah, and I love that you brought that up because his relationship too with, was it Rose? Was that her name?
Mhm.
Right? Yeah, Rose Landry. Yeah, yeah, yeah. His relationship with Rose was so beautiful because she then became a safe space for him to share some of his feelings. And she recognizes in that moment too, in that breakup, like you must not have a lot of people that you can talk to about this, right? Because coming from these industries too that are just like under the microscope. And so I think like as we start to learn about the characters more, we already know from the beginning hockey in and of itself has this toxic masculinity that we're talking about, right? The performative nature of like fighting on the ice and everybody kind of getting riled up and just like how tough the sport is itself. And so how does that work with having these like tender, sweet, vulnerable moments between Ilya and Shane, right? What does that contrast, like that dichotomy, like in their personalities, relationships, identities? So there's so much, I think, to be said. I honestly was thinking about this too. I was like, man, this is probably gonna have to be like multiple episodes because there's so much to get into when we're talking about just even the cognitive dissonance and
Mhm.
how do we balance what's going on for the characters, right? The narrative around like Shane and Ilya hating each other in the public eye, going after the same endorsements or even commercials they're doing where they're enemies and they're on the ice versus this private, like confessing their love to each other. So much happens, and yet we come away with this love story that we're all being swept up by and like we're enamored by. There's something really powerful about their love. There's just this like alignment that happens. Like, is it the sports? Is it the moment in time that they're getting together? Is it the chemistry, the on-screen chemistry of the two of them? How different their temperaments are? I mean, there's like a million things going on,
Mhm.
but truly I can say just like such a beloved series. Like I can't believe it's like it already feels like it's like a classic and it came out like 5 seconds ago. It's so funny. Like I talk about it like can you think back to like Heated Rivalry like from 3 days ago? But it's so good, and I'm really, really curious, like, what's gonna happen as, this hype grows and then, like, future seasons coming out, or is this like a one-off, like, mini series? I don't actually even know, like,
I
what.
think it's based off of a book called Game Changers, and I know that there's a series, so I'm guessing that I think there will be multiple seasons, especially given the success. And it's interesting because it was only 6 episodes, and I think, my guess is that, they probably, made it because it really originally was not an HBO show. It was by Crave, which I believe is a Canadian production company, and so I don't know that it was supposed to be, distributed on this level. And so I wonder if it was like made shorter because there were like stories like the Scott Hunter, this other star player, which is all shown in one episode. But that could have easily been, if this is a 10, 12, 14 episode season, then you can interweave these different stories throughout instead of just isolating it to one, maybe two episodes. And they do pack a lot in, right? They go through from rookie camp when they're kids to when they're later more established in their careers where they're thinking about second contracts and you know and strategizing for their own future, right? And thinking about when we retire or when we maybe you change teams, what our story can be and how do we make this work, because again we have to keep things behind the scenes. And so that's also interesting, right? Like, and there's a lot of beauty to that part of the story too, that they're like planning their future, but again some of that like sadness behind the scenes piece, right? That they have to do it in it's strategically to create a foundation, and maybe they move, closer to each other to be able to see each other often, but that they still can't be, out in the open the way they want to be.
Yeah, and I think that is the push-pull that is happening. It's like you're so happy for them to have this, like, love, and they're planning as any couple would plan in their future, yet their plans have to be calculated, strategic, have to be kind of, "Hey, is Ilya gonna get traded, move to a different team, like, that can be more local in Canada? Like, what does that look like?" This foundation would then allow them to be in the public without eyebrows being raised. So you're having to think about all of these things. And yeah, I mean, it's tough. And I think that also kind of gets into. I think what I love is there's many scenes I love, but in the cottage scene where they're sitting at the table eating pasta, like with Shane's parents, and you can just kind of see both of their personalities come out. Like Shane's like trying to plan, like, what about this? What about this? And Ilya's just like eating this giant bowl of pasta. And it's just like, yeah, 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 no, that sounds good. But it also speaks to, I think Shane's personality, this like highly anxious, a little bit compulsive. We even talked about like his I think in the books, right, we were talking about the neurodivergence around like Shane had been written as a character that was on the spectrum. And I don't know how many viewers caught this. I myself kind of noticed like some of the social deficits that were going on. And I really attributed that to, I was actually unsure. And it was funny because that's one of the things I said to you was I was like, man, is it because they're isolated, because they're high performers and they don't necessarily like, maybe they're
Mhm.
homeschooled or they don't have a lot of these social activities? Because you can see this, anxiety, right, that he experiences. And then you start to see a little bit more like literal communication, missing sarcasm, missing some social cues. And so there's like that piece of it too that we're like starting to uncover and learn about Shane. Again, in contrast to Ilya's like social connectedness and comfort that he feels, like almost this like battery recharging he gets when he's like in a group of people.
And you really see like Ilya's, the contrast of Ilya, right, to Shane. Shane is, direct. He doesn't really like dwell in, he gets the high anxiety moments, but he doesn't, dwell in that like filter place. Whereas Ilya has got all these walls up, right? And he's, he pushes people away. He says things to upset Shane early on, and really is super guarded. And Shane doesn't have those guards, right? He just says what he thinks, but then you see how the story develops where Shane has these really high anxiety moments about what's going to happen in the future, or when his dad is in the cottage, and you see those guards come down for Ilya, and how he is able to kind of access that, right? He's able to put the spaghetti down in the scene and kind of give him a hug and a kiss, and right, be like, okay, it's going to be okay. And that's the evolution of both of these characters, right? That again, they don't have to be, one has to be like, I'm the strong, supportive one, and the other one is always reliant or something like that. It goes really both ways. And it was interesting to see I think I had read something about the author stating that both I think the showrunner and the character who played Shane recognized that he was neurodivergent or on the spectrum. And I thought like played it really well, because I think it also reframes what a lot of people might think of, when we think of folks on the spectrum, and what that presentation is. And so, I really thought that was an interesting characterization of that.
I thought so too, and it made me think about the scene where he's talking about his Shane is talking about his financial investments, and then he's like, "Oh yeah, this is a great place," and he's like, "Oh yeah, I bought the place next door, and then I like broke it down, and then I'm gonna invest in this other place." And Ilya's like, "Yeah, who asked?" And he's like, "You did," and he's like, "No, I didn't." And then you're just sort of you're like, "Oh yeah, I don't think he did." But Shane's like sort of scripted in that social way to just like very matter of fact sharing like the fact, here's the investment, here's what I bought, here's what it made. And so I think there's something really endearing and sweet about how they communicate with each other, and also like no judgment from Ilya, right? Like there's not this, even though they experience those social situations and conversations and approach them in different ways, there's this kind of humor to it as well that I think is really sweet.
Yeah. And I think like you said, this is already feels like a classic, probably because you and me are so super engrossed into like all the discussions and, the side chats and all that stuff. But, I think it's interesting because it really, when we talk about representation, I think this is really a good representation of what good representation looks like. And, I think that's why it is changing narratives. Like the commissioner of the NHL was talking about how he binged this show, right? I can't imagine even the NFL that happening, right? Like in the hockey and football, I would put rugby up there, probably considered some of the most masculine sports. And so, to see this in this kind of sport, right? You couldn't tell this story in golf or, some select sports, right? And so I think it had to be told in this setting because it's also the hockey is an international sport. So this not just plays to American culture or certain Western. Oh, this is applicable in so many countries, right? And so I really think that that adds to the impact that this show has already had and will continue to have. And I think I'll just wrap with my kind of final thought here, which is, this show reminded me of a story that opened my eyes to, the importance of representation of therapy and mental health focus for men. For much of my career, it was very rare that I worked with men in therapy for an extended period because people just didn't want to come to therapy and it wasn't supposed to be something that men did. And I remember a story that one of my, 30 something male clients told me once was, he had not talked about going to therapy with his friends, but one time shared it after playing in a rec hockey league game and they were, doing a very typical have beers after the game kind of thing, and they had experienced a loss in their community, and he, just said like, "Hey guys, I just wanted to share that I've been going to therapy." And he kind of said like one by one, his friends started to say, "Oh, I've been thinking about going to therapy. Who do you see?" Or, "I actually just started therapy as well." Or, "My wife and I have been talking about both going to therapy." And it really started this conversation that he didn't expect. I definitely didn't expect it either. And so, I thought it's just such a good, you know, reminder of sometimes it doesn't take much for things to change, for mindsets to change. And sometimes it's just you share something and people will connect to it. So my final thought here and encourage everybody to go watch the show. What do you got?
Yeah, I love that. I love that you shared that story. This like domino effect, right? Of like it takes a person to have some courage to have the conversation and others will follow, like with that safety. I have so many final thoughts. I'm going to stick to one. I think a lot of what I thought about was why this story really mattered, right? Like in our culture, in the sports world, in the therapeutic mental health world. And I think like for me, the big takeaway is what does a healthy love look like? I think in a world in which so many people have gone through so many tragic things and we're seeing so many challenging moments and we all have our own traumas and backgrounds and this like true ability to love and be loved from a place of vulnerability, from a place of like being healthy. It's not about being perfect. It's about how to show up and try to love someone honestly and truly. And I think that's what I was so struck by is like this incredible story of two people that really love and adore each other. And I hope we get to see more representation and more stories like this because it was really incredible and I love it. I mean, I encourage everyone to watch it. Drop your comments and anything that resonated with you, stuck with you, moments, episodes, scenes. But yeah, there's too many to share.
Definitely. All right, everybody. Thank you for tuning in. We really enjoyed this conversation and hope you did too. And we will see you next time on Think Good Podcast. Peace out.
Bye.